Was the head of my life. When I hear people say that, I always think, I never say that, so I'm saying that today.
All right.
To my pastor and all the ministers and pastors and pulpit, my first lady in her absence, I miss my first lady.
Amen.
And tell her I love her, Pastor. I miss seeing her face. I'm sitting in her seat. I'm keeping her warm till she gets back.
Amen.
I want to just say this morning that, you know, the spirit in the church this morning is that of, I feel like, of, you know, how we got over. Like the spirit this morning is clearly allowing us to give thanks for how we got over. We give thanks for the human beings who are on those ships. And I always say human beings because as a nation, we're still so emotionally immature, we're calling them slaves. They were human beings who were enslaved. And our emotional maturity is getting ready to catch up. That's one of the things we can do in 2011. We can stop repeating the misinformation that we've been getting. Just because we were given it, don't mean we got to keep it. It's like the way that we viewed religion. For many of us as Christians, you know, we learned from a kind of a broken place. People had whips and chains and a Bible in their hand. And that brokenness sometimes tend to show up in us. And so when we're saying we love the Lord, we're saying we're Christians, but we're talking about each other, or we're harming each other, we're just presenting some brokenness that we learned. But just because we learned it, don't mean we got to keep doing it.
That's right.
And just because we've been miseducated about some things does not mean we have to pass on that miseducation. And so I'm always grateful for my ancestors because they had to make an agreement with God's favor on them. You know, God was showing favor that they would still be alive when those ships landed, but they had to be in agreement. Millions of them jumped overboard. And so there were many seeds that are on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean right now because those men and women jumped over. The ride was too much. It was just too horrific. We don't even talk much about how horrific the ride was because it's that horrific. You know, some of those ships were in such bad shape that when they did land, they were loaded with kerosene and set on fire. If there were some people still living, they didn't even go on to try to find out if there were any still living. So when we honor who we are as a people and we don't know all that information, we do ourselves a disservice. We really are a chosen few. We were a chosen few. That's the only way to describe what it took for us to get from Africa to here. And then we all know what we endured when we landed in this country. You know, it wasn't for the weak at heart. It wasn't for the faint at heart, and it wasn't for people who did not believe that the favor of God was on them. Our people had to believe. They weren't just able to sit around and say, well, yeah, I know the Lord's going to save me. You know, I know the Lord's going to free me from this. They had to say that, but they had to believe it. They had to believe it in their bones, in their spirit, and in their soul. And they had to do that because when it came time for them to rise to the occasion, they couldn't be flimsy. They could not go half spirited. You know, they couldn't go broken. They couldn't go confused. They couldn't go wounded. They had to be front row center, all eyes on deck, full bodies, full spirit, full souls, in agreement. And I think that that's one of the unfortunate things that's happened in the miseducation that has been going on through the generations is our children don't understand that we were in agreement. And by us being in agreement, we were able to get done the job that we were called to do. We were called to teach this nation the difference between love and no love. We had to be in agreement agreement with God to teach this nation what they were doing that was not pleasing to God, and what they were doing that what they were capable of doing that would please God.
Amen.
And God chose us. I mean, how magnificent is that?
Amen.
You know, He didn't choose people from the Philippines. He didn't choose people from China, although He's using them today to teach us some stuff too. All their children learn Chinese and English. They don't segregate based off of the lighter skinned Chinese and the darker skinned Chinese. They're all learning. They're all being taken care of. They're all being instructed properly on how to live. But I digress. Let me go back. I ain't talking about them today. I'm talking about us. And so God's favor on us allowed us to walk through some things that are still very difficult to put down on paper. They're still very difficult to speak. They're still very difficult for us to stand in the majesty of. But just because they're difficult does not mean we're not going to do it. And so a lot of people, you know, kind of have our history, like we may be on our way out. You know, maybe we didn't survive the trip after all. There are some people who think that. There are some people who are living like that. They're ending the journey quick because they believe, for whatever the reasons, things maybe happened to them in their childhood, things they're not able to let go of, things that they were told about themselves that aren't true, that they still believe. We don't know it. We don't have to walk in everybody's shoes to know that there's a lot of brokenness at work today. But historically, we've already been taught that if there was a man who walked in here, produced all those miracles, and then was in agreement with God again to go and be crucified so that all of us confused ones would have some guidelines. You know, we'd have some blueprints on how to get the best out of this life. We have some examples of some people who came before us, and it is our responsibility to shed all that fear. You know, there's a saying, jump and grow your wings while you're falling. Like, you know, so you learn how to fly. Like, don't be afraid. You know, don't get to the cliff and look over and say, it's too deep. I ain't, you know. Don't get to the edge of your life or get to edges of situations where you, just because you're confused or you're not sure the outcome, that you turn around and go back. We've already turned around and went back enough for any lifetimes. And so we don't have to keep doing that. So, you know, I'm really grateful. This is always a big weekend. I worked with a lot of people during the time when the work was being done to make Dr. King's holiday, birthday a holiday. And think about this. All those African American people, we were Negro in those days, and we were colored in those days, but all those people that went out there on those front lines, were hosed down, were attacked by dogs, were beat with billy clubs, and guess what? It wasn't for them. It wasn't for them. They all knew that they were subject to die before the day was out. So they weren't going for them. They were going so that we, who were coming behind them, could be educated. There's no other group of people in this country that had to send a whole generation off to die in a war for that group to be educated. There's nobody in this country. Chinese Americans didn't have to do that. Filipino Americans didn't have to do that. Samoan Americans didn't have to do that. African American people are the only ones who had to go out in an army to agree to die for their children to be educated. Now, it took me a long time for that to click. So if it ain't clicked yet for you, don't worry about it. If you want it to click, it will. It took me a long time for that to click with me. But once I got it, I've been compelled to make sure that I tell everybody I know that. That my education was bought with not just money, it was bought with life. It was bought with blood, sweat, and tears that were not mine. And so I don't have the excuse of throwing the education away, and I don't have the excuse of watching children not be educated and keep my mouth shut. I'm responsible for those lives that were given for me before I came, and I owe them something. I owe them a debt of my gratitude. And it's not in my living room flicking my remote. The debt that I owe is for the gift business is love. It's always love. And I get to love everybody I can as much as I can because that was love.